In the chronicles of medieval history, few deaths stand out with the same grotesque horror as that of Baldwin the first Crusader king of Jerusalem. This was no ordinary ruler. He was a man who had seized the Holy Land through fire and sword, who had terrified his enemies, and been celebrated across Europe as a champion of Christendom. Yet, when death finally came for him in 1118, it did not arrive on the battlefield in a blaze of glory. Instead, it crept upon him with a slow, revolting decay, turning his once mighty body into something closer to a corpse while he still breathed. The year was 1118, and the fragile Crusader states were barely 2 decades old, carved out of the Middle Eastern landscape by men who had followed the First Crusade. Baldwin, their ruler, held court in Jerusalem, a city wrenched from Muslim control 19 years earlier. The region itself was a volatile crucible. Christian enclaves ruled by European knights sitting uneasily among powerful Muslim dynasties eager to reclaim their lands. Baldwin's reign was one of constant tension, endless wars, political marriages meant to secure alliances, and the difficult balancing act of ruling a largely non-Christian population while maintaining European support. Born Baldwin of Boulogne, he was the brother of Godfrey of Bouillon, leader of the First Crusade. But unlike many who came east, driven by pure religious zeal, Baldwin was more pragmatic, an ambitious man who saw opportunity in chaos. Before seizing Jerusalem's throne, he had carved out the county of Edessa, the first Crusader state. Ruthless, calculating, and militarily capable, he ruled through both respect and fear. His court was a strange blend of imported European nobility and local administrators, reflecting his ability to adapt to the complex political realities of the conquered Levant. The beginning of his end came during what should have been a straightforward campaign. In early 1118, Baldwin led an expedition into Egypt, pressuring the Fatimid Caliphate into paying tribute. The march itself was largely uneventful, but on the return journey through the burning deserts of Sinai, disaster struck. The king was overcome by what chroniclers of the age described as a violent and sudden illness. Today, historians suspect severe dysentery or food poisoning, both common and frequently lethal during medieval campaigns. At first, the symptoms were familiar: stomach pain, weakness, digestive distress. But what followed defied comprehension. His condition worsened with frightening speed. Baldwin's abdomen began to swell monstrously, bloating as infections ravaged his gut and toxins spread through his blood. His skin turned ghostly pale, then shifted into unnatural hues as his body poisoned itself from within. The smell of rot soon seeped from him. Chroniclers note that even his most loyal attendants gagged and could barely enter his tent. Medicine in the 12th century offered little hope. Baldwin's doctors, schooled in prayer, humors, and herbal remedies, were powerless against bacterial infection. His belly grew grotesquely distended, his flesh stretching under the pressure of gases and fluids building inside. The once fearsome monarch became almost unrecognizable, a swollen, decaying shadow of his former self. Hardened knights, men who had survived the slaughter of Crusader battlefields, could not endure the sight or stench of their king. Servants drew lots to decide who would enter his chamber, and even they could only remain minutes before fleeing into the fresh desert air. What made this torment worse was Baldwin's awareness. He remained conscious for much of his suffering, trapped in a body betraying him, aware of the horror etched into the faces of those forced to look upon him. As the days passed, his flesh began to ooze foul fluids, seeping from his pores and natural openings. His tent became a chamber of rot. William of Tyre later described how attendants hung cloths soaked in incense in a futile attempt to mask the unbearable odor of death that filled the camp. Death finally ended Baldwin's misery on April 2nd, 1118, near the fortress of Alarish. But even in death, indignity continued. The desert heat had accelerated decomposition, and his corpse swelled to the point of bursting. As attendants attempted to prepare him for burial, the pressure inside released violently. His body ruptured, spilling a torrent of putrid matter that horrified even seasoned gravediggers accustomed to battlefield carnage. The shock of his demise reverberated through the Crusader states and Europe alike. Here was a man, thought invincible, brought down not by sword or arrow, but by his own flesh rotting from within. Too many, his end carried theological weight. Some saw divine punishment for his brutal treatment of Muslim populations. Others claimed it as a warning against pride and earthly ambition. For his followers, it was a bitter humiliation, the Christian king of Jerusalem reduced to a spectacle of corruption. Politically, Baldwin's death was disastrous. He left no direct heir, triggering a succession crisis at the worst possible moment. The Crusader states were surrounded by hostile powers, and the loss of a strong ruler undermined their fragile stability. His brother Baldwin II would inherit the crown, but the sense of vulnerability never left the kingdom. The grotesque death of Baldwin I had stripped away the aura of divine invincibility that Crusader rulers depended upon. From a modern perspective, his symptoms suggest catastrophic gastrointestinal infection, possibly septicemia, combined with necrotizing fasciitis. The abdominal swelling, skin discoloration, foul odor, and rapid tissue breakdown all point to bacterial infection overtaking his system. In effect, Baldwin began to decompose while still alive. Today, antibiotics and supportive care could likely have saved him, but in his age, such conditions were untreatable and often fatal. For medieval witnesses, however, the medical explanation mattered less than the terror of what they saw. To them, the image of a king dissolving into foul matter while still on earth was a reminder of mortality's power over even the mightiest. Chroniclers, who normally wrote in restrained tones, abandoned euphemism, recording Baldwin's corruption in shocking detail. Their accounts became morality tales, woven into sermons and exemplar literature, a warning that all worldly power rots, that the king's body and the beggar's body meet the same end. News of Baldwin's dreadful fate traveled swiftly. Pilgrims, merchants, and envoys carried tales of the rotting king back to Europe, where they unsettled noble courts and dampened enthusiasm for crusading. Muslim chroniclers, by contrast, seized upon his gruesome death as proof of divine justice, Allah's judgment upon the Christian invader. Yet, for all its grotesquerie, Baldwin's death preserved a legacy. The vivid accounts of his passing are among the most detailed medical descriptions surviving from the Middle Ages, granting modern historians a rare window into disease, death, and the fears of a society where medicine could not save even its kings. His transformation from a conquering monarch into a bloated corpse became part of the medieval imagination, a brutal memento mori that haunted generations. Ultimately, Baldwin I's horrific end illustrates the most democratic truth of human existence. Death spares no one. A man who once bent nations to his will was undone by unseen microbes. His death stripped away the trappings of royalty, leaving only the shared fate of all flesh. For medieval chroniclers, that was the true lesson, that kings and peasants alike decay, and that, in the end, earthly crowns cannot protect a body from corruption.